Now that we know about the scientific method, we're going to discuss the types of psychological research most popularly conducted. The three types of research that are used most commonly today are descriptive research, correlational research, and experimental research. Descriptive research is about describing some phenomena in the world. This research allows scientists to develop a sense for something, but does not answer questions of causality. Descriptive research methods include observational studies, surveys and interviews, and case studies. For an observational study to be effective, it is important that the researcher conducts it systematically. Researchers must know what they are looking for, who they should be observing, where and when these observations should take place, and how observations should be made. One method to gain information about people is to interview them directly. When information needs to be obtained from a large group of people, a survey or questionnaire can also be used. A survey consists of questions about a person's self-reported attitudes or beliefs about a specific topic. Surveys and interviews can be problematic, however, because sometimes participants will answer the questions in a way they believe is socially acceptable instead of how they really feel. Survey construction can also be problematic due to unclear language. A case study, also known as a case history, is conducted when a researcher takes an in-depth look at a single individual. A case study is usually conducted by a clinical psychologist when the unique aspect of an individual's life cannot be duplicated in other individuals. For example, an individual with damage to a specific area of the brain may be studied because it would be unethical to organically damage that area of the brain of a participant in another research study. In general, descriptive research allows scientists to get a sense of something, but cannot answer questions about how and why things are the way they are. Descriptive findings provide a foundation for researchers to further examine a topic or subject in different cultural settings, but they do not answer questions such as causality. The second type of psychological research we will discuss is correlational research. This is conducted when studies are concerned with identifying the relationships between two or more variables so it can be understood how the variables change together. In a correlational study, the variables are measured by the researcher to see how they are related. The strength of the relationship between the two variables is expressed as a correlational coefficient, which ranges between -1 and +1. The numeric value of the correlation coefficient determines the strength of the relationship between the variables, and the negative or positive sign determines the direction of the relationship between the variables. A positive correlation occurs when the variables move in the same direction. So if one variable increases, the other variable would increase as well. And if it decreases, the other variable would also decrease. A negative correlation occurs when the variables move in opposite directions. So if one variable increases, the other variable would decrease and vice versa. It is important to remember that correlational research does not conclude a causation. A correlation between two variables states only that there is a relationship between the two variables, not that one of the variables causes the other one. The third variable problem occurs when an extraneous variable that has not been measured accounts for the relationship between two variables. Third variables are are also called confounds. Even with the risk of a third variable, correlation studies are important because they allow us to research variables that cannot be manipulated. Correlational studies can also be conducted on variables that would be considered unethical to use in an experimental setting. The third type of psychological research we will discuss is experimental research. To determine a causal relationship, experimental methods must be used. In an experiment, the researcher manipulates one of the variables to see if it influences the behavior in question. If the behavior changes when one of the variables is manipulated, then the manipulated variable is considered to have caused the behavior to change. Researchers use random assignment by dividing a study's participants randomly into two different groups by chance. Of course, random assignment does not always work. To improve the effectiveness of random assignments, the researcher should start with a large pool of subjects. The larger the subject pool is, the more faith the researcher can have in his or her findings. Experiments consist of two types of variables, an independent and dependent variable. The independent variable is the variable that is manipulated in an experiment. The dependent variable is the result of manipulating the independent variable. The dependent variable is the variable that the researcher measures. Experiments consist of two or more groups. The experimental group is the group that receives the independent variable. The control group is exactly like the experimental group, except that there is no manipulation of the variable. The control group is used as a comparison group. So if I wanted to test my hypothesis of the effectiveness of pre-workout before exercise, the experimental group would take pre-workout before engaging in exercise, and the control group would not take pre-workout. Researchers aim for their experiments to both be valid and reliable. Validity refers to the soundness of the conclusions that a researcher draws from an experiment. External validity refers to whether the experimental design is representative of real-world issues. Internal validity refers to whether changes in the dependent variable are actually due to the manipulation of the independent variable. So if my goal were to give a psychology exam that measured the information that was learned over the semester, my test would be considered valid if it asked psychological questions on the exam. It would be considered invalid if, for example, I asked you to shoot free throws as a measurement of your psychological knowledge over the semester. Reliability refers to being able to replicate the results of an experiment over and over again. So for example, if I gave you a psychology exam and you got an A on it one time, and the next time you got a C on it, the next time you got an F on it, the next time you got an A on it, you would not be replicating your results, and therefore the exam would probably have low reliability. Next week, we will talk about brain and behavior as it relates to psychology.